One of the biggest mistakes that I see new Airbnb investors making is either using Airbnb's smart pricing tool or just flat out manually setting all of their pricing. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I customize my PriceLabs accounts, and I'm going to share with you all of the customizations that I use to manage all 19 of my properties in order to maximize my daily rates and my occupancy. And if you've been wondering how to set up minimum nightly stays, last minute discounts, and orphan days, we're going to talk through all of that stuff in this video. All right, so jumping right into PriceLabs, the first thing it's probably going to ask you to do is link either your Airbnb account or your property management software. There will be a button in the top right corner that says add your listing. So you'll go ahead and do that, and then you'll likely be brought to this screen here. And if you're just curious on how to implement these customizations and set up everything properly in PriceLabs, then go ahead and just keep tuning in. All right, so first things first, when you're on this page, we're really going to do two things here. One, we're going to set all the customizations, and then two, we're going to set a base and a minimum price. All right, so go ahead and click Edit on Customizations, and then click All Customizations, and it's going to share with you everything here that we're going to go through. So first things first, last minute customizations. I would toggle this on. I always go with a flat 40% anytime we are within 14 days and save that. So I'm pretty aggressive when it comes to my overall rates, and I want to push them as long as I possibly can, which is why I opt for that 40% discount as soon as we are within that 2-week mark. All right, next year is going to be far out prices. I personally am not tuning into these. I'm a firm believer in, hey, let's set a proper base rate and continue to dial that in really, once or twice a week. And in return, PriceLabs is going to do the work for the far out customizations. Some people will turn this on to kind of hedge against in case their pricing was a little lower. But, in my experience, I think just gradually working towards getting your pricing fully dialed and then taking advantage of having your pricing properly in line for those far out bookings so you can start to secure them. If you're too aggressive with your far out pricing here, you're not going to rack up any far out bookings, which is going to, probably lead to you needing to implement more discounts as you get closer. Next here, booking recency factor. I would leave this here off. This is something that ultimately will increase discounts if you are not getting bookings. This isn't something that I like because what if we're fully booked for the next 45 days? Let's say you get like a month-long stay. You might not get a reservation for 15 days, and you don't want to be discounting your future pricing and basically penalizing your ADR because you had, a good, month or a good 2 months or a longer stay that would automatically trigger this. All right, next year is going to be orphan day pricing, and you can just kind of follow along here. So I'm going to be using a percentage discount. We're going to go 35% on the weekdays, 30% on the weekends. That'll be a discount for any orphan day that is just one night. And then we can kind of stagger this down. We will go 30 on the weekdays, 25 on the weekends for anything that is 2 nights. And then here we can go 25 on the weekdays, nothing on the weekends if it is a 3-night gap. So basically what this means is if you have an orphan day of one night, which means let's say your Thursday is rented and your Saturday is rented, but your Friday is still available. It's just a one-night stay, and anytime you have one of those, the chances of renting that day just significantly drop. So we're going to go pretty aggressive on the discount that would automatically be applied there. We'll do the same thing for 2 days, same thing for 3 days. We're not going to worry about discounting on the weekends for the 3-day there. All right, occupancy-based adjustments, I would turn this on and leave this at default. Safety minimum price, we can leave this off. Ideal just solely with the minimum price that we're going to be talking about here in a moment. Demand sensitivity factor, so this one is important. And this one, you kind of have to ask yourself, hey, how did your place end up turning out? After the design and the furniture, if you think you are really ahead of the competition, you can go aggressive with this. I'll be honest, even most of my places are set to this moderately aggressive. So if you think you've got just a top-notch product among your market, going with the moderately aggressive, could be a good place to start. If your house turned out to be a little bit more average, you don't have a crazy design, wallpaper, accent walls, murals, some really stunning photos, you'll probably end up in this recommended, column here, which is fine. This is what the PriceLabs, recommendations are going to be set to after we implement everything. But basically what this here is, anytime there is a demand, meaning, a high demand for an event coming in town, it's going to take those dates and it's going to add a multiplier to them. So we're really, jacking up the price with the aggressive and the moderately aggressive anytime, there's something going on in town. So kind of got to ask yourself here, If you're not sure, you could start out at moderately aggressive, and then if you're not getting traction within your bookings, likely dropping this to recommended is going to be serving you well. Seasonality sensitivity factor, I would not be turning this on. This might apply for a handful of markets out there, but most of them, it's not needed. Again, just continuing to monitor and dial the daily, on a daily basis, the minimum and the base price, it's going to take care of any seasonality fluctuations that your property will see. Same thing with the custom seasonality profile. Again, this is only applicable to a very specific amount of markets that have huge swings up and down in their overall occupancy. All right, weekend adjustments. I would classify weekends to be Friday, Saturday. And again, when we are setting, for example, like those orphan day discounts, if you have Thursdays in your market are just as in demand as Fridays and Saturdays, maybe you'd include Thursday as well. So some of those discounts aren't applicable for those reservations. But again, most markets here are going to be just Friday, Saturday. I think all of the places I'm invested, this is how I've got it set up. Minimum weekend prices, I would leave this off. Again, I'm a big fan of just using the base and the minimum to control really all of the pricing aspects. Adjacent factor, I would leave this off. Day of the week pricing adjustments, I would turn this on. I would just start off with a simple, I would say like 15% discount on the weekdays and probably a 10% premium on the weekends. So literally just like this. And this is just to ultimately provide a little bit more discount on top of what PriceLabs thinks is appropriate for your weekdays, because those are always going to be a little more difficult to rent. And then putting a premium on for the weekends. And, starting to get a feel for what your calendar looks like over your first month or two, we can probably come back and revisit this. If you're renting the weekends, no problem, but not the weekdays, then maybe we don't touch your base price and we just drop this pricing adjustment here, or vice versa. It's kind of like another lever we can pull without changing all of your pricing to get these dates rented. Pricing offset, I would leave off. Rounding, I would leave off. Smoothing, I would leave off. And no price updates for unavailable nights, I would leave off. All right, so that is the all customizations there. The last thing that doesn't look like is included in here is going to be your stay restrictions. So we're going to go to the minimum stay settings and let's go with custom here. Now, again, this is going to be dependent on your property, but for the most part, I am requiring people to stay 2 nights on the weekdays and the weekends. If it's an orphan gap, I'm going to allow, let's see here, a gap. So if it's a weekday or a weekend and it's a 1-night gap, I'm going to drop that to 1 night. Same thing with if it's between 2 and I would say 3, I'm going to drop it to allowing for 2 nights. And if it is between 3 and 4, I'm going to allow it to drop to allow 3 nights here. So basically what this means is, hey, we have a 2-2 default, meaning we're requiring people to book every weekday and every weekend for at least 2 nights. But hey, what if we have an orphan day where, again, that Thursday and Saturday is rented? If we don't make an adjustment to that minimum length of stay, someone won't be able to book Friday because they can't book for 2 nights. So that's what we're doing here by these orphan gaps. Okay. And then again, we've got the 2-2 default, but we do need to add a last minute booking in here as well. All right, last minute bookings here. So this here is important because, hey, we're requiring the 2-night stay, but at some point we might be close enough to that check-in date to where we do want to allow those 1-night stays. So in this case here, generally what I'm doing is if it is within 14 days on a weekday or within 7 days on a weekend, I want to allow for those 1-night stays. This means, hey, if we're within 7 days of check-in and someone wants to book a 1 night on the weekend, I'm fine with it. And if we're within 14 days of a weekday and someone wants to book 1 night, I'm okay with it. And then lastly, here's going to be far out booking. So, do we want to, sometimes require someone to book 3 or 4 nights? And in that case here, most of the time it's yes. So I will generally go like 2-3 once we are past 60 days, meaning if someone wants to book 3 months out in advance, I'm going to make them book 3 nights on the weekends, generally not on the weekdays. I'm still cool with the 2 nights on the weekdays. And then if we want to go like a 3-4, this is going to be pretty aggressive. But, if someone's booking out 4 months in advance, making them book, 3 and 4 can certainly be appropriate. So we'll go ahead and save those changes there. We'll let everything load here. But that is the full set of customizations on how I am generally setting things up. If you want to go ahead and pause this screen and screenshot this, you'll be able to see all of that over here on the left-hand side. So that's part 1. That is the first thing that we're doing here. Now that we've got all the customizations in, the second thing that we need to do is we need to set the base and the minimum. So in that case here, we can click on this, help me choose a base price. And generally speaking, when I'm launching a property, I will go ahead and use the recommended base price that PriceLabs is giving. And generally, what I'll do is most properties are getting launched at mid scale, but I want to be a little bit aggressive, when we are first launching a place. And this is why it's important for you to monitor your pricing on a daily or every other day basis, especially when you go live. But, I'm generally going like 10% under the market recommendation for a mid scale property. So if this is at 316, we want to take off like $31. I might launch this at, 280. And that there is, what I'm generally using. So it's help me choose a base price, market base, mid scale, select your proper bedroom, and then subtract 10%. And this is going to help your listing get a little jump start to it. And then if you're getting good bookings and your calendar's starting to fill up, well, then at that point, you can dial this up and add in a little more friction to slow things down. All right, then lastly here is going to be the minimum. And generally what I'll use for the minimum is the first thing we'll do is we click save after we set that base. And then what's going to happen is PriceLabs is going to sync all of your pricing based off of this base rate. And then what we can do is, we go out to the next 30 days. And PriceLabs is basically telling us where we need to be listed in order to have a chance of getting rented. And we can see here the lowest PriceLabs is recommending is $132 for next month, $133 for the month of September, $127 is on there. So generally speaking, I'm just going to take that lowest number unless it's like absurdly low, but for a 4-bedroom urban property, setting a minimum of $120, isn't anything outrageous. Now, again, PriceLabs is never going to go that low unless they, think that they need to in order to get it rented. But by having a higher minimum than what PriceLabs is recommending there is basically you saying, okay, PriceLabs, I'm cool with not renting those nights. But you can see here, we set the minimum at 120. You can see none of these dates have reached 120. We're still priced at, 376 on some of these, but only if we get close enough to that date and PriceLabs can tell, supply versus demand is needed and we get some of these discounts to kick in. Only then would it potentially drop to 120. It will never go below your minimum there. So there you have it. That is the customizations, the base, and the minimum on how I am setting up these properties in PriceLabs. If you want help setting up an Airbnb the right way from the start, or you just want to avoid all the trial and error, I help new investors find, set up, and manage their Airbnbs profitably. So if you're serious about getting started with Airbnb and you're looking for help, I'm going to include a link in the description below to book a free call. Let's connect and we'll see if we can help you out.